Okay, so our group is doing our presentation on Cola Wars Continue. To start things off with our introduction, Coca-Cola was founded in 1886 by John Pemberton, a pharmacist in Atlanta, Georgia. And Pepsi-Cola, with a similar background, was invented in 1893 by a pharmacist named Caleb Bradham. As consumers look for alternative beverages to satisfy their taste buds, the carbonated drink industry sees a spike in the revenue as Coke and Pepsi implement their plans while simultaneously, unknowingly, creating a cult-like culture within the US and abroad. With Coca-Cola owning a majority of the market share, it came to the realization of a real threat that can fight for dominance in total market competition, and that company is Pepsi. Coca-Cola had in the past year went about business comfortably, crushing any smaller sized beverage company. It had the law on their side in the form of patent rights and their bottling techniques and its famous Coca-Cola ingredient, but all things changed as Pepsi entered the industry. For Coke to stay competitive and the industry leader, Coke had to adapt to its environment in order to combat against competition and to stay financially healthy. As the industry's second leader, Pepsi constantly followed Coke and had made similar changes within its own organization in order to keep putting pressure on Coke. For example, as Coke entered the fountain drink channel, so did Pepsi. This can also be said for Coke as well, as Pepsi branched off into the fast food industry by purchasing Taco Bell, KFC, and Pizza Hut in order to sell more fountain drinks. This triggered Coke to make deals with Burger King and McDonald's. With heavy pressure from Pepsi, Coke's market share declined and Pepsi gained momentum. The battle between these two organizations continued into different channels. As the industry leader, Coke saw many successes and opportunities. Coke soon became a growing franchise that offered contracts to bottling companies to bottle the beverages and gain accounts with many small and large outlets. Such an example are CVS, Walgreens, and 7-Eleven, as well as branching into the fast food industry to sell fountain drinks. Historically, Coke and Pepsi focused their strategy in different outlets, but as soon as competition forced them into battling the same outlets. Vending machines are another outlet that these two companies soon invested heavily in. Vending machines would be passed on to each other's companies, respective bottling companies, to service and maintain, often giving commission to the location owners for allowing them to install the vending machine. Other challenges come as a form of internal agreements and partnerships, as bottling companies wanted more bargaining and flexibility. As sales plummeted but prices of concentrated syrup increased, Coke proceeded by purchasing many of these smaller, failing bottling franchises in order to have more control over their operations. So for the industry analysis, we're going to focus on each of Porter's 5 forces, the first one being industry rivalry. The industry rivalry for the soft drink market is extremely high. As the name of the article suggests, it's a constant battle between Coke, Pepsi, and other soft drink producers to grab and maintain as much market share as they can. Some of the reasons for the intense rivalry are the large number of competitors and similar products. Since each company is producing substitutes for each other's products, the competition between them is high. And an example of this intense rivalry is Pepsi's previous CEO, Alfred Steele, who's made his motto, quote, beat Coke, end quote. The threat of new entrants is the next of the 5 forces, and we thought that it was low. One of the reasons for this is the role that bottlers play. Finding a bottler to purchase and bottle your concentrate can be difficult because industry leaders like Coke and Pepsi have franchise agreements with their bottlers that prevent them from bottling another company's concentrate. Another challenge is to acquire shelf space in supermarkets. There are hundreds of different soft drinks for consumers to choose from, but only a limited amount of shelf space available to stock them. And the third barrier to entry is advertising expense. Coke, Pepsi, and other big names spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year on marketing and advertising. And a new entrant will not have anything close to that kind of budget available to them. The next of Porter's five forces is the threat of substitutes, which we also thought was pretty high. Some of the substitutes available to consumers are milk, coffee, bottled water, juice, tea, and sports drinks. In addition to that, each of the substitutes are all similar in price, so there's not a very high cost to the consumer, if any, if they wanted to switch. One of the ways Coke is protecting themselves from the risk of substitutes is by branching out into different segments of the industry. For example, Coke purchased Minute Maid, which produces fruit juice, and Belmont Spring Water, which produces bottled water. This makes it possible for Coke to produce substitutes for its main product, Coca-Cola, without losing sales to the competitors. The next of the five forces is the power of suppliers, which we thought was low. The reason for this is because the raw materials needed for concentrate like water, flavoring, caffeine, and sugar are cheap, and there are plenty of companies that can supply them. It's also likely that Coke is the biggest customer for whoever supplies them with raw materials. And since it would not cost Coke very much to switch to a different supplier, then their current supplier probably has little say in the prices that they charge. The last of Porter's five forces is the power of buyers, which we thought was high in the soft drink industry. As the article states, the consolidation of retail stores means that the power of buyers dramatically increases. For Coke, the top 10 retail customers represented nearly 40% of U.S. sales. This means that big retail chains like Walmart can pressure Coke into lowering prices and increasing the prices that they charge for shelving arrangements because they were such a significant source of revenue for Coke. So now onto the competitor analysis, and we're going to focus on Pepsi. So the current strategies used by Pepsi are similar to the strategies used by Coke. Since both companies are direct competitors and produce substitutes for each other, if a strategy works for one of them, the other tends to copy it. So for example, one of the strategies used by Pepsi was to purchase its largest bottler or largest bottlers in order to have more control over beverage operations. Another strategy used by Pepsi was to create alternatives to CSD beverages. This included investing into sports drinks like Powerade, tea, juices, and their bottled water brand called Aquafina in order to adapt to changing consumer preferences. Pepsi also just finished a 3-year rebranding plan that cost over $1 billion in advertising and marketing. And the whole purpose of this was to promote Pepsi's image as a snack and beverage company rather than just a company that only sells CSD products. The strategic mission behind Pepsi's strategies was to increase their market share relative to Coke and also to rejuvenate the company's image. With more and more consumers switching to alternatives to CSDs, Pepsi decided to rebrand and focus on the snack industry as well as the beverage industry since it merged with Frito-Lay back in 1965. Despite their best efforts and over $1 billion budget, the rebranding strategy ended up not working as well as Pepsi had hoped, and market surveys done in 2010 showed that consumers still preferred Coke to Pepsi. So some of the core competencies that Pepsi has is that they own already popular, established, and successful brands. They own things like Mountain Dew, Tostitos, Doritos, Cheetos, Gatorade, and some of these things take years and years and years to build up, so it makes it pretty hard, if not impossible, for other companies to imitate that. And then another thing they have is direct store distribution, which enables Pepsi to sell directly to its customers, such as like anything from like big retail chains like Walmart all the way down to like mom and pop convenience stores. And the competitive response profile, like I mentioned before, they like to adopt successful strategies that Coke comes up with, and vice versa. Coke can also adopt successful strategies that Pepsi comes up with. And another thing they do is they adapt to changing consumer preferences, which is kind of a big deal right now as more and more consumers switch to more healthier alternatives to CSD products. And so now we're on to internal analysis, and we're going to talk about the resources. And the core of the resource supply chain for CSDs consists of concentrate producers, bottlers, distributors, and marketers. Each has a very specific task that makes production run smoothly. Concentrate producers are in charge of using raw materials to create the specific flavor and combination for each soft drink. The concentrate is then sent to a bottling plant where it is mixed with carbonated water and placed in a bottle or a can. Bottlers work with distributors or transport the finished products themselves if they're in a franchise agreement with the CSD brand. Distribution efforts also include set areas where the beverages are marketed in various retailer displays. All in all, the production and resources used is simple enough, but this also means that more competition can enter the market just as easily. And on to the value chain. The first point is talking about an act called the Soft Drink Interbrand Competition Act, which allows concentrate producers to set territories so that bottlers could not then produce and distribute the same beverages within other bottler territories. This allowed for fair competition between brands and retail locations. Another idea that was struck up was the creation of accounts with fast food chains that made product sales increase or remain steady since the recent decline of soft drink brand sales. However, since CSD brands could not increase their soda sales, they opted to merge or buy out the bottlers they worked with in order to expand their product lines and overall market share of drinks produced. And the last part of the internal analysis is the functional analysis. The function of the CSD brands can be broken down into sections that are easy to follow, just as in the resource chain. The functional areas, however, involve more investment into the marketing aspect of the brands. Since the cost of production is low, it is possible to invest more in sales efforts. Many of the brands have opted to invest in alternate drinks that are competing directly with their soft drink sales. This also brings in more profits to the CSD companies, but they had to restructure their organizations in order to adjust the disparity of their dropping market shares in the beverage industry. So the main cost for concentrate producers is advertising, promotion, market research, and supporting bottlers. And on the other hand, the main costs for bottlers include a significant capital investment for a factory, other things like machinery, labor, packaging, and overhead. And operating profit margins for bottlers average around 8%, which is only about a third of what concentrate producers had. So one of the reasons for the differences in profitability is due to the huge capital requirements of bottlers. In fact, a large plant with multiple assembly lines and automation could cost up to hundreds of millions of dollars. And in addition to that, concentrate producers limited the companies that the bottlers could work for. So for example, which we kind of talked about earlier, Coke bottlers could not carry directly competing brands. And then as non-CSDs became more popular, bottlers also took a hit to their profit margins because non-CSD products required a smaller and more specialized production process that was challenging for bottlers to meet with their existing infrastructure. And for number 2, how can Coke and Pepsi sustain their profits in the wake of flattening demand and the growing popularity of non-CSDs? So we think that in order for Pepsi to maintain for Coke and Pepsi to maintain their profits, that they should invest more heavily in their non-CSD brands and less on their CSD brands. It doesn't really make sense for them to continue investing heavily in marketing and advertising for CSDs if demand for them is falling. Instead, we think Coke and Pepsi should focus their efforts on making their CSD brands more profitable through marketing, advertising, and bottler support. Dealing with bottlers would be the most expensive since bottling facilities are currently equipped to mass produce CSDs, but we think that ultimately it would be worth it in the end. So for strategy formulation, our first one we came up with was to heavily invest in alternatives to CSD products, so things like juices, tea, bottled water. Our second strategy, increase marketing and advertising for CSD products to increase demand. So kind of try to like convince people to keep buying CSDs instead of switching to non-CSDs. And then our third strategy was to enter into the snack market like Pepsi did when they merged with Frito-Lay. So the strategy we thought ended up being the best was our first one, to invest in healthier alternatives. We thought that the second one didn't really make sense because why would you continue to invest in CSD products if it's pretty clear that consumer demand is heading towards healthier alternatives? And then our third strategy, we thought Coke would be able to do it, but it just seemed too expensive at this point. Kind of merging into the snack market would probably cost billions of dollars. And we think strategy one would just be more effective. And so consumers, like we said, are switching to teas, juices. On the picture on the side here, we have one of Coke's brands called Odwalla, and it's a fruit smoothie brand. They've also developed a version of a stevia-based sweetener, which is a zero-calorie sweetener based on an herb called stevia. For their CSD products to kind of as an alternative to sugar. So in conclusion, Coke operates in a highly competitive soft drink industry, and currently consumer demand is switching to healthier alternatives, and we think that in order to stay successful, Coke needs to adapt to the new demands and do things like invest in healthier alternatives. And if they don't, we think they could risk losing market share to competitors like Pepsi, and it could end up costing them billions of dollars if they don't.